Well, I'm a bit unusual for the average person who comes here in that I'm a type collector and don't collect die varieties that much, although I have all the die variety books, and I attribute everything that comes into my hands. But I'm actually interested in variety and history and all those sort of things. Gentlemen, please. Gentlemen, please.
Guys, take it outside, okay? Because we started here.
Okay. So I'm going to take you through a set that I put together recently, finished, although it's not quite finished. I could add 3 more coins to it. But nonetheless, it's a group of 1795 coins, which were mostly produced in 1795, although some of them were produced in 1796. And the interesting part about this particular year at the Mint was that there were some very unusual things that went on. Now, most people think that 1796 is the really great year to collect because you can get all 10 denominations, and there's all these coins which are either proofs or proof-likes, or they're specimens, or they're something special that were made that year. So that traditionally has been something that's been very, very attractive to collectors. But since I'd have to buy a half-cent that would cost me a fortune, in addition to a number of other things that don't really fit in my collection, 1795 became the year, and when I got down to 2 coins, which was actually the yin and the yang, the half-cent and the $10 gold piece, I decided, well, I'm going to go ahead and just get them all the same date and finish off the group. So I'm going to give you a little bit of Mint history while we're doing this, and also give you some pointers on looking for these coins, not necessarily as die varieties, but just as designs of early U.S. pieces. Now, I've entitled this the year that the Mint tried to fulfill its promises. And the reason why I'm saying that was that the U.S. Mint, as it existed, the very first one, was a very, very small operation, and it never could supply enough coins to take care of the United States economy, despite the fact the economy was a fraction of the size that it is today. And there were moves in Congress very early on to do away with the Mint. And this was really the first year that Congress really started pressuring the Mint, hey, get your act together, start making more coins, make them look better, give us quality. And the Mint had some very, very rocky years in the late 1790s and early 1800s when there were actually bills before Congress to do away with it. But this was the first year when the pedal really came to the metal and Congress started complaining about what was going on. Whoops, too fast. Just to give you a quick history, our monetary system was started in 1792 with Act 1, which was passed in April of that time. And after that act was passed, in July, the first United States coin, at least what I would consider to be the first United States coin, the 1792 half diem was struck. That was struck before the Mint property was purchased, and it was under the supervision of Thomas Jefferson. The mintage was somewhere around 1,500 pieces, and the silver, it is very, very, very likely, was supplied by George Washington, but no, Martha did not have to give up her silverware. It was coins, probably Spanish coins mostly, that George had generated in his plantation business. So from $75 worth of silver, they made 1,500 coins, and today probably there's about 300 or so, 325 of these still in existence. But I will warn you that the vast majority of the survivors are in pretty sorry shape. So it is a very popular and difficult coin to locate. Now, in February of 1793, the Mint itself issued its first coins for general circulation. They had made some patterns before that, and those were, of course, the chain cents, which were very unpopular at their time because of images of chains and slavery and that sort of thing, and plus people also thought the coins were pretty ugly. Now, later in 1793, along in the summer in July, the half-cent came out, and also at the same time the re-cents were being produced, which was the replacement for the chain cent. And if you look at the half-cent up there and the re-cent that's up there, the reverse, the die work is incredibly similar, so obviously it was done by the same hand. Now, one of the sources of the design for early U.S. coins was the Libertas Americana medal, which was a commemorative piece issued in commemoration of the independence of the United States. And it was conceived and sponsored by Benjamin Franklin, and he personally handed out copies of this medal to various important dignitaries. If you were more important, you got a silver one. If you were less important, you got a bronze one. And if you were the king of France, the king and queen of France, you ended up with a gold one. However, they ended up without their heads, and the gold ones, we don't know what happened to them, so they no longer exist. But at any rate, this piece was at least one of the models. Some people say another piece called the Lyon Convention medal was the model, but at any rate, this one obviously inspired the designs on our early U.S. coinage. And on the silver, it's more obvious because you have the Liberty cap there. On the copper, it's more obvious you do. On the silver, it's less obvious, but it's still the same flowing hair design without the cap. Now, this is a picture I took in 1993, which I kind of got the guard to turn his back at the U.S. Mint, and I had the opportunity to take this little shot of this is probably the only equipment the government currently owns that was used in the first United States Mint. They say it's a coin press and that it's also a coin roller. Now, this particular piece was something central in the events that occurred in 1795. Now, in the first couple of years of the Mint's existence, 1793 and most of 1794, the only thing that they could produce were copper coins. And the reason for that was that the chief assayer and the chief coiner were expected to post bonds of $10,000 before they were allowed to handle precious metals. Now, that was kind of difficult because these guys were making $1,200 a year. So if you do the math, it took 8 years and 4 months just to be able to get enough money. If you didn't use your money for anything else, just to raise up the cash to be able to get the bonds so that you could handle gold and silver. Obviously, this wasn't going to work. So Thomas Jefferson went to Congress, they passed the law, reduced the bonds, Jefferson arranged for a loan, and finally in October of 1794, the first U.S. silver coins were struck, silver dollars. November, the half dollars came along just after that. So now we were starting to issue silver coins, and Congress was saying, hey, it's time to really start issuing silver and gold, which will have a major impact on the economy and will make this mint worth the expenditure that we're putting out here to keep this thing going. So you guys had best start, getting the silver and gold out there, and enough so it'll really, really make things work better. Now, the Mint looked at their production situation, and they found out that they had one really, really bad bottleneck, and that was the coin roller, which took the ingots and rolled them out into the sheets of, copper, silver, and gold, which were then punched out to make the planches. And the problem was, and you can actually see it on this picture, was that little gear there was made out of copper. It wasn't made out of iron, it wasn't made out of steel. So it was constantly breaking down. And so the Mint officials made a decision very early on in the year, before the production started in 1795, that they would suspend production of all copper coinage. So the only thing that the Mint was producing in the early years or in the early months of 1795, as a matter of fact for most of the year, was silver and gold, no copper pieces. So if you're a copper collector and they perfect the time machine, don't go back to the first part of 1795, because if you go there and take a tour of the Mint, they won't be making any of the coins that you really enjoy. Now, there were further complications in the first part of the year. The only tools that they had, dies that were made, were for the half dime, the half dollar, and the silver dollar. The problem with the silver dollar was that they didn't have a press that was big enough to really make silver dollars. And I'm going to show you a 1794 that illustrates that quite shortly. So all the Mint was making for the winter months and early spring of 1795 were half dollars and half dimes. Now, if you're interested in getting one of the half dollars, this is about as nice and extremely fine example as I've ever seen. I've never seen one any better than this for the grade. This is not a real scarce, difficult coin to find, but the trouble is most of the ones out there are terribly worn, and they're usually cleaned white. And while they do bring, good prices, finding original ones is very, very difficult. The half dime is a little easier. As a matter of fact, I collect early half dimes by Red Book variety. I've been doing that for about 30 years. And I will tell you that the 1795 half dime is the easiest date to obtain in the entire series. And that's wrapped up in just a couple of varieties as well, because there's 10 varieties of half dimes and there's only 3 or 4 of them that show up with any kind of consistency at all. The others are quite rare. And as a matter of fact, we found out through the research that despite the fact that there are 1794 half dimes, all of them were minted in 1795. And they were probably among the group of like 7,700 pieces that were first delivered in the first part of the year. But we know that there were some 1795 half dimes among that group. So the conclusion is 1794 half dimes were all made in 1795. Now here's the $1794 I was talking about. And this particular piece is actually, it's in a slab, it's graded VF, and as you can tell by the detail, VF is a good grade for it. But look around here. No legend, stars weak. This was the problem. The press that the mint had simply could not exert enough pressure to strike these coins. And the total mintage was something like 2,000 pieces, round numbers now. But 250 of them were so poorly struck that the mint simply didn't issue them. And to kind of prove that out, there is actually one known example of a 1794 flowing hair silver dollar, which has 1795 flowing hair dollar, which has 1794 undertype on it, which is an indicator that the piece was overstruck. So that was the problem. They couldn't do silver dollars till they got the new press, and the new press didn't come in till May. So that was sort of the way the production schedule went. Now, once the new press came in, and this probably was not it, but at any rate, once the new press came in, they started striking the 1795 flowing hair dollars in fairly large quantities. And despite the fact that it is an expensive coin, mainly because it's popular, it's not terribly rare. You can locate them with some regularity. But once again, finding ones that are original, that haven't been messed with a lot, that don't have major problems, you know, you will look for a while for that. Now, one of the things, the reason why I asked the question about, was this thing a planchet cutter? There was a fellow who used to work for a place called the Gallery Mint, which used to make copies of U.S. coins, legal ones with copies stamped into them, who claimed that this press here, that the U.S. government claims was a coin press, was really too small and not big enough as a, you know, to strike coins. He said it was a planchet cutter. I don't know, I'm just giving a minority opinion on that. I think enough people have said that it is a press, and it looks enough like a press to me to say that it was in fact a device that was used to strike U.S. coins. Now here's a flowing hair dollar. This is a pretty nice example. It's graded by P.C. Jesse F40, and I would agree with that particular grade. One of the fun things though when you're collecting coins in this era is that you can find little goofs and things with a strong glass, and they're a lot of fun. And then when you have a chance to get your fancy camera to work and catch those little groups, you can get it. And on this particular piece, you see there's a 1 underneath the 7. It's a very, very common variety. It's well known. But still, it shows right there, you know, an error, a die blunder while the piece is being prepared. Now, this is another piece that illustrates something else that went on at the first United States Mint. These coins had to come in at the weight that was prescribed by law. Now, when they made the planches, if they were too heavy, they had ladies who sat all day long with leather aprons and files, and they ground off the excess metal. So you have these little marks here, and they're called adjustment marks.
Was that before it was stamped?
That was before, yeah. So they were there, and, you know, taking off little bits of metal, and they did it on gold coins as well. I don't believe they ever did it on copper. I mean, maybe some people try to claim it when they're trying to sell a copper piece with scrapes all over it, but no, they didn't do that with copper. But at any rate, here's an example of it, and in very rare instances where the planchet was too light, there are pieces known which have plugs that have been pushed into them to bring the weight back up. Now those will bring a premium, and they're very, very scarce. Most of the time when a planchet proved to be too light, they ended up going back to the melting pot and they had to start all over again. So that's just an interesting sidelight, and you will find adjustment marks on a number of coins. Sometimes you need a 10-power glass to see them, but they will be there. Now, in June of 1795, David Rittenhouse, who was the first director of the Mint, resigned. His health was getting to be pretty bad. He died the next year. And a fellow named Henry de Saussure took his place. And if somebody knows how to really pronounce his name, I would be in your debt, because I've tried to find out for years and really don't know. But Henry was never, ever confirmed as a United States Mint director, but he did a lot of important things in the few months that he was in office. He came into office and basically he had three things he had to get done. Get the gold coins started, get the mintages up so that the coins can actually have an impact on the U.S. economy, and finally make the darn things look better, because everybody thought they were pretty ugly. While we love the small legal design that appears on the early silver coins, people back then said it looked like a sick turkey. The flowing hair design said, well, it looks like a wild squaw with the heebie-jeebies. There were lots and lots of complaints about what these coins look like, despite the fact that we really like them today. So those were the marching orders for Mr. de Saussure when he came into office. Now, one of the stories, and whether it's legend or whether it's true or not, was that this lady, Mrs. Anne William Bingham, was a model for Gilbert Stuart for the designs that eventually appeared on the early U.S. coinage, the Drake bust coinage. This is actually a charcoal sketch that Gilbert Stuart did, and I was able to get this from from a place in Rhode Island, which is a museum there where when Gilbert Stuart was like 6, 7 years old, lived there, and his family ground tobacco. That was how they made their living. And they had a large book there, and this was an unusual picture of her, which, rather interesting. He definitely did do at least one painting of her, and probably more, because her husband was an extremely rich Philadelphia merchant, and they were very, very well-to-do, part of the Federalist elite in the nation's capital, then in Philadelphia. So she was quite well known at the time and considered to be a great beauty. This was the eventual translation, which actually appeared in 1795. I don't have a 1795 Drake bust that's on my to-do list or want list, but if you've got a spare $20,000 around, I'm sure that we could locate one way or another. These things have really gotten outrageously expensive. But nonetheless, these coins made their first appearance at the end of September of 1795. So you have two types there for the particular year. Now, in July of 1795, the Mint finally issued its first gold coins, and those first pieces were appropriately enough the half eagle or $5 gold piece. This was a very important event in the history of the United States, because to issue a gold coin was really a sign of sovereignty, really a big deal. And in reality, I think in some ways, the Mint went out of its way to make these coins as nice as they possibly could. There are, I think, 15 or 16 varieties of these, and the mintage is only like 7,700 coins. I'll give you the exact numbers afterwards as far as how many obverse and reverse dies are known. Some of them were probably struck in later years, because the Mint would trot the dies out, in the late 1790s and strike some more 1795s, despite the fact the years had changed. But nonetheless, the Mint made a huge effort to make these coins just as attractive as possible and with few problems as possible. Finding broken dies, not huge die breaks on these early pieces is pretty unusual. Now later on, you get to the 1798, there's a piece with huge cuds on it, which I did own one once many years ago when I was a young collector and foolishly sold it. But still, in these early pieces, though, they made a real good effort to make them nice. Now in September, the flagship gold coin, the $10 gold piece, was introduced. And this is quite an impressive piece if you've never seen one. They're quite big. They're almost the diameter of a $20 gold piece, but they're thinner. And they're also quite a bit rarer than the $5 gold piece. So this particular one is the very first die pair that was used. It's actually one of the more common ones. So this is sort of the chain set of $10 gold pieces. But it's very large, very impressive piece. But the interesting thing was, it was not the popular denomination that the founding fathers thought it might have been, the more popular denomination that the depositors wanted. And that's the way it worked in those days. You brought your gold to the Mint, you gave it to them, and for little or no cost, they turned it into coins for you. Well, most of the depositors seem to want the $5 gold piece instead of the $10 gold piece. So the mintages on the 5s are much higher. And if you get into trying to find these things, you'll find out that the 5s are the ones of all the early gold coins that are the easiest to locate. And the hardest to locate are the little 2.5s because they weren't popular at all. So this particular piece, introduced in 1795, they were discontinued in 1804 because Thomas Jefferson, who was president at the time, thought that they were facilitating the flow of gold out of the country along with silver dollars doing the same thing. So the series ends there and doesn't pick up again until 1838. Now, finally we get to the copper. And believe it or not, the U.S. Mint did not make a single copper coin until October of 1795. And when they did, the laws were still in place where the pieces were large, thick coins with edge lettering. So you have this particular half cent has edge lettering around at 200 for $1, and it's it's a big, thick, substantial coin. Now these are difficult to find in really, really nice condition. There are ones out there, you'll find them out there on the floor, but usually they'll be porous, they'll have their difficulties, and the Mint often didn't do a great job of striking these, especially the later ones which had a reduced weight, and very often you'll find them with the word half cent not visible at all. It never was visible because the die failed in that particular area and it just was never struck up. You'll also find them on very poor copper. Some of them were done on copper large cent planchets that weren't good enough to be issued as large cents, so they simply clipped them down and then struck them over, struck the half cent over them with sometimes the undertype showing up. There are also pieces that were struck on Talbot Alum and Lee cents, which were some tokens that were used in the New York area at that time. The Mint got their hands on those, chopped them down, turned them into half cents. So all these things end up in the production of half cents that are less than absolutely gorgeous. Now, in late December, like December the 26th, 27th, George Washington exercised an option that Congress had given to him to reduce the size of the copper coinage. Now, the reason why they were doing that was some of the same things we hear today. The price of copper, the Congress was afraid was going to go up and become so high that it wouldn't be economically viable for the Mint to continue to issue the pieces at the particular weight that had originally been authorized. So the pieces were cut down as far as the size went, that late date, and at that particular time the Mint took the new weights and ran with them. They made a large number of these pieces in late 1795, and it is kind of my contention, given the fact that this is a late die-state example of the Sheldon 76B, which comes both with the thick planchets with the lettered edge and with the thin planchets with no lettering on the edge. I've always thought that this particular piece was struck sometime in that December area, although certainly it may have come in early January because they continued to produce these cents with this particular date on it well into 1796. And as for the half cents, the reason why the 1796 half cent is so rare and so difficult is that they had the dies lying around and they spent most of the year making 1795 half cents in 1796. So that's the reason why that particular date is so difficult to locate. Well, we go to 1796, and that year the last three denominations that had been authorized were issued. You had the dime, the quarter, and the $2.50 gold piece. And that was the only year in which the U.S. Mint produced every denomination that was authorized by the Coinage Act of 1792. Every other year you're going to be missing at least one or more denominations. Yeah?
What about the $half?
Yeah, they produced those in 1796.
Right.
Rare as the devil, but you can get them, but really difficult. But that wasn't introduced, but that had been introduced in 1795, so it wasn't a new denomination, it wasn't there. So that was it. They finally got all the denominations out, but even with all of that, the Mint was never large enough to produce. They'd never had production enough to really have a huge impact on the United States economy. And that problem persisted all the way until January the 1st, 1833, when the mint facility moved to a much larger facility that was also in Philadelphia. And this particular 1832 dime marked the end of the U.S. mint era as far as the first mint went. And then from then on, they moved to another place, got steam presses, got more modern, started to produce more coins. But one of the interesting things was, at the time this coin was minted, there were more people in the United States than there were United States coins in circulation, which kind of tells you something about how little impact the first mint really had. So we collect something that probably a lot of our forefathers didn't get to see that much, but we thoroughly enjoy them. Yeah.
Well, weren't there some issues at the beginning of the 1800s where a lot of the gold coins were melted beforehand?
Yeah, they were always a little bit too heavy, and then the situation really got bad in the 1820s, where they were about the only people who got gold coins from the 1820s were members of Congress who demanded that they be paid in gold. So, you know, they were pulling rank even back then. As a matter of fact, some of the studies that I've done on the $2.50 gold pieces in the 1820s, they claimed a lot of these were just paid to congressmen. You know, that was, you know, where they went. And then they didn't hardly circulate, so they're very rare coins in well-circulated condition. You'll see AUs, you'll see some unks, low-end unks usually, but you won't see very many of them in like VF or some really well-used condition. And you won't see very many of them at all, actually, because most of them ended up in the melting pot and disappeared. So, you know, the mintages were small, and then the tiny mintages got to be a lot less because they simply all went to the melting pot because of their weight. And of course, it was profitable when they switched over in 1834. They reduced the weight of a $5 gold piece, so you could have gone in with, you know, this so-called old tenor gold, as they called it, and if you had enough of it, you could take, you know, 100 $5 gold pieces in and take 105 $5 gold pieces out, because they were, you know, the early ones were simply too heavy. And that's the reason why, especially the pieces in the 1830s, are just so rare. You know, the number of survivors, like I bought an 1829 about a year or so ago, and I was really amazed when I looked it up in the Bass Dan Rather book, where they claim there's only like fewer than 100 known. So they're very, very scarce items, and the reason was they simply got melted down. So that's it. So if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to field them.
That was your half stamp? The
Yeah, all the
Edge 95?
yeah, that was mine. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I own all the coins here with the exception of the $17.94. Harry Leibson was good enough to let me download that off his website, and unfortunately I don't own the $17.96 Puerto Rico. I would love to, but I had that one on consignment at one time when I was a dealer, and I tried to get my very best customer to buy it, begged him to, because I told him it was a heck of a deal and he wouldn't spring for it. Today, that's his mistake, because that coin's easily worth $200,000. He would have more than doubled his money, no problem at all. So, but everything else I own, and there are samples of what up here. I didn't bring them all because it's just, you know, it's just too much to bring. But you can take a look at the pieces that are in my collection up here. I do have 4 of them, and one of them is actually on the block, so you can buy it if you want. So, anything else? No, I guess we're good. Thank you.